Hey guys. Tonight we're diving into a chapter of history that sounds almost like a nightmare, but was a harsh reality for millions. We're heading to Victorian England, not to the elegant drawing rooms or gaslit streets, but into the cold, unforgiving maw of the workhouse system. Here, where the promise of charity often masked a brutal regime designed to break the spirit, and where hope, for many, slowly died, replaced by a dull, persistent ache. Forget the gaslight romance, the bustling markets, or the grand industrial progress Hollywood sold you. The truth of the Victorian workhouse is far grittier, a place where the very air felt heavy with despair. If you were among the unfortunate souls who crossed its threshold, you probably wouldn't last a single month before your spirit, if not your body, succumbed. So before you get comfortable in your soft bed, take a moment to truly appreciate the sheer, unimaginable luxury of your present existence, your freedom, your warmth, your privacy. And if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, if these journeys into the uncomfortable truths of history resonate with you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. It helps more than you know. Also, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world sharing this quiet, often chilling contemplation of history. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft, almost imperceptible background hum. Let the gentle drone of my voice be your guide as we ease into tonight's journey together, a journey into the heart of Victorian destitution.
Congratulations, you've just woken up. The year is 1840. The good news, if you can call it that, is that you're sheltered. You're not freezing on the streets, not starving in a ditch. You have a roof over your head. The bad news, however, is that your shelter is a Victorian workhouse, and the fleas are very much alive and very much your closest companions. Your bed isn't a plush mattress, it's a thin straw mattress, meticulously packed, yet as unyielding as a wooden board. It's shared, not just with bugs, but with the warmth and restless movements of at least 2, perhaps 3 other unfortunates crammed beside you. There are no pillows, just a bundled piece of coarse, scratchy cloth, barely offering any comfort to your aching neck. And definitely no Egyptian cotton sheets, just thin, coarse wool blankets that have likely not seen a proper wash since the last widespread epidemic, perhaps a year or more ago. They carry the accumulated scent of countless bodies, unwashed and afraid, a heavy, cloying odor that clings to your skin even after you rise. The weight of the grime is almost as oppressive as the weight of your circumstances. Every rustle of the straw stirs up microscopic particles of dust, dried skin, and insect detritus, filling your lungs with the very essence of your confinement. You blink awake, your eyes crusty and heavy, not to the gentle chirping of birds or the soft glow of a digital alarm. Instead, the jarring clang of the workhouse bell tears through the pre-dawn stillness. It's not a church bell in the distance, a quaint medieval alarm. This bell is inside, loud, insistent, and utterly devoid of mercy. It's the workhouse version of an alarm clock, but far more tyrannical, its metallic shriek tearing through the thin veil of sleep, signaling the end of your brief, restless reprieve. The sound vibrates through the stone, a physical assault that jolts you into the grim reality of another day. Your home is not a hut, but a vast, echoing dormitory, rows upon rows of identical beds stretch into the dim light, each occupied by a silent, suffering soul. The air is thick with the collective breath of hundreds, a palpable density that makes each inhalation feel heavy. There are no windows to the outside world, only high barred openings that let in a sliver of gray light and a constant chilling draft. This is the ultimate open concept floor plan where hundreds of souls, stripped of their names and identities, share the same cold space. Your family, if they're even here with you, are just other anonymous bodies in the rows, indistinguishable in the gloom. The smell? Oh, it's a fragrant symphony of human desperation, a layered olfactory assault, a subtle yet pervasive blend of stale sweat, unwashed bodies, the faint tang of cheap disinfectant, if you're lucky enough to be in a more modern institution. And something else, something you desperately pray isn't the lingering scent of illness and decay, but in your soul you know it probably is. Scented candles haven't been invented, and even if they were, they'd be confiscated as a frivolous luxury, perhaps melting slowly into the cold, damp stone floor, leaving behind only a greasy stain, a testament to forbidden indulgence. You try to stretch, a simple, natural human impulse, but you immediately regret it. The air is not just cold, it's a penetrating, bone-deep chill that seeps into your very marrow, making your muscles seize. Your joints ache with a chronic, dull throb, a constant reminder of the meager diet and the hard labor that awaits. You're 25 years old, a young adult by modern standards, but in workhouse terms, you feel roughly middle-aged, worn down by a life of hardship. Your spine creaks like an old, ungreased wooden door, each movement a protest, and your knees sound like a bag of rocks being shaken by a confused, desperate peasant. Your body, despite its youth, is already a testament to the harshness of your chosen path, a vessel of chronic pain and fatigue. Getting out of bed is not a gentle transition, it's a gamble. The floor beneath your bare feet is either wet from the condensation dripping from the ceiling or the dampness seeping through the stone, or it's crusty from something unspeakable tracked in from outside, or perhaps from the shared chamber pots that sit in the corner, overflowing from the night. Either way, your bare feet, already calloused and cold, are now part of this grim ecosystem, instantly acquiring a fresh layer of grime that clings stubbornly. Oh, and privacy? What's that? It's a forgotten luxury, a concept as alien as a warm bath. Your entire family, if they're fortunate enough to be incarcerated with you, and maybe a random cousin who just never left, are waking up beside you, their bodies a tangle of limbs in the dim light, their every stir audible. There's no bedroom, no curtains, no me time for quiet contemplation or personal space, no moment of solitude. Just communal everything, a constant, inescapable presence of others. Their breathing, their coughs, their silent despair, a constant companion. Every sound, every movement, every shared indignity reinforces the fact that you are but one cog in this vast, dehumanizing machine. And this is just how your day starts. It only gets worse from here.
So, you've managed to crawl out of your Victorian haystack of horrors. Congrats. Your stomach clenches, your bladder protests. Nature calls, and it's not calling politely. It's screaming, a desperate internal plea for relief that cannot be ignored. Here's the part where you start missing the modern bathroom, a sanctuary of porcelain and privacy, with its gleaming fixtures, soft lighting, and comforting flush. There's no toilet, no comfortable seat, no soft toilet paper, not even a mildly resentful plunger lurking in the corner. In the 19th century workhouse, relieving yourself is an adventure, a social experiment, and often a small public event, utterly devoid of dignity and fraught with health risks. If you're an inmate, your bathroom is likely a communal latrine, a long wooden bench with multiple holes, shared by dozens, sometimes hundreds of your fellow unfortunates. The structure itself is usually rudimentary. A simple wooden shed or a stone enclosure with open trenches or cesspits beneath the holes. The stench is biblical, a thick, suffocating cloud of human waste that assaults your nostrils, burns your eyes, and clings to your clothes and hair long after you leave. You hold your breath, do your business as quickly as possible, and then, here's the kicker, there's no flush. The waste simply drops into a cesspit below, slowly accumulating, a putrid, festering pool. The pit is already full because hundreds of people have used it before you,
And the night soil men, the laborers responsible for emptying these pits, only come once a week, if that, or when the overflow becomes truly unmanageable. The air is thick with flies, buzzing constantly, landing on everything, a constant, disgusting reminder of the unsanitary conditions. Privacy is a myth, a cruel joke. You sit shoulder to shoulder with strangers, their grunts, groans, and sighs accompanying your own, every bodily function a shared experience. You might try to make small talk, a desperate attempt at human connection in this dehumanizing environment, but try not to breathe too deeply, lest you inhale the very essence of human misery and disease. Toilet paper? Never heard of it. The very concept is alien. Most people wipe with whatever scrap of coarse cloth they can find, a piece of old newspaper, or a handful of straw. Or, if they're truly desperate, just their bare hands. Which might explain why handshakes, outside of the most formal and necessary settings, weren't exactly popular yet, and why the spread of disease was so rampant. And if you're thinking, surely it's better for the staff, right? Well, sort of. They might have a slightly less public privy, perhaps a single hole in a small private room, but the underlying sanitation issues remain. The workhouse, despite its strict rules and attempts at order, was a breeding ground for disease. The latrines, the overflowing cesspits, and the lack of proper waste disposal were often the epicenter of outbreaks of cholera, typhus, and dysentery. One slip on a wet, slick floor coated with human waste, and you're face first in humanity's collective leftovers. A grim baptism into the realities of Victorian sanitation. And you still haven't brushed your teeth, a minor indignity compared to the rest, but one that contributes to the overall assault on your senses and health. We'll get to that next.
You survived the toilet. You deserve a reward, right? Maybe a nice warm breakfast. Something delicious, comforting. A moment of solace before the day's relentless labor begins. Sorry. This is a Victorian workhouse. Nothing is comforting here. Breakfast, if you can even dignify it with that name, is a grim affair. A meager offering designed not to nourish, but merely to sustain life at its most basic, brutal level. A daily reminder of your absolute destitution. There are no eggs Benedict, no sizzling bacon, no coffee machines sputtering awake with the promise of a new day, and certainly no avocado toast. You sit down, or more accurately, squat, on a hard wooden bench at a long communal table in the dining hall. The hall itself is usually vast, echoing, and poorly lit, filled with the shuffling sounds of hundreds of inmates and the clatter of wooden bowls. In front of you is a wooden bowl of something that looks like it was scraped off a muddy boot, or perhaps, more accurately, from the bottom of a stagnant pond. Welcome to your daily ration of gruel. Gruel is a thin, watery, gloopy paste made of whatever cheap grains could be sourced, usually oats or barley, sometimes even cheaper, coarser grains like maize or rye, boiled with water until it formed a gray, unappetizing sludge. It's been simmering in the same vast iron pot over the workhouse kitchen fires for days, sometimes weeks, with new batches simply dumped on top of the old, creating a perpetually lukewarm, vaguely fermented concoction. It's less of a recipe and more of an ongoing, barely edible experiment in mass sustenance, a culinary testament to scarcity and institutional indifference. The taste is bland, monotonous, utterly devoid of flavor, a persistent reminder of your station in life. It's designed to fill your stomach, not to satisfy your palate or provide genuine nutrition. The consistency is often uneven, with lumps of uncooked grain or watery pockets, making each spoonful a gamble. On the side, a hunk of bread. Not a soft, fluffy loaf, but a dense, heavy brick, so hard it could be used as a weapon. It's made from the coarsest rye or barley flour, often bulked up with sawdust, ground up acorns, or other creative, indigestible ingredients, because wheat, the finer grain, is a rich man's fantasy, a luxury utterly unknown within these walls. This loaf is not your friend. You don't slice it with a knife, you negotiate with it, tearing off chunks with desperate, aching fingers, often having to dunk it in your gruel to soften it enough to chew. It's dry, gritty, and leaves your mouth feeling like a desert, a constant reminder of its poor quality. What about drinks? You're not sipping orange juice or an oat milk latte. You're drinking water. Yes, water. At 6 a.m. Why? Because it's the only liquid available. The water, often drawn from a communal well, or worse, a nearby river polluted by the very town it serves, is teeming with parasites, bacteria, and the entire microbial army of Victorian England. Outside the workhouse, people might drink weak beer or gin, because brewing or distilling boiled the water, making it a far safer option. But here, there's no such luxury. You drink the water, knowing, deep in your gut, that it might be the very thing that brings on the next wave of dysentery or cholera. No one's happy about it, but at least it won't kill you immediately, hopefully. Want some meat or cheese? Dream on. That's for the workhouse master's table, for Sundays, and perhaps for the rare, meager Christmas feast, and only if the Board of Guardians is feeling exceptionally generous. Most inmates don't eat meat more than a few times a year, if at all. It's a rare, almost mythical luxury. As for fresh fruit, it's only available when it's in season and not already rotten or stolen. And don't even think about spices. A pinch of pepper or a speck of cinnamon costs more than a month of your forced labor could ever earn. Salt, if available, is rationed meticulously, valuable enough to be locked away. So you chew your gritty bread, gulp your questionable water, and try not to think about the rats that may have nibbled your gruel in the night, or the lingering taste of despair that accompanies every bite. Breakfast doesn't energize you, it just happens to you. It's a daily, soul-crushing ritual that marks the beginning of another day of bare existence. And now that you're properly underfed, with your stomach rumbling a hollow protest, it's time to work like your life depends on it, because in the workhouse, it absolutely does.
So you've eaten your sad, tasteless breakfast, and now it's time to get dressed. Not that it'll help much. Your wardrobe consists of exactly one outfit. One. It's a rough, coarse wool tunic or a linen shift, depending on the season and the workhouse's meager stores, that you've worn every day for months, possibly years. There's no such thing as seasonal fashion, no changing trends, no concept of a capsule wardrobe or personal style. There is just this single ensemble designed for durability, not comfort, and certainly not for dignity. It's to be worn until it literally disintegrates on your body or gives you a persistent, festering fungal infection, a constant companion. Underwear? Optional, at best. For many, it's a non-existent luxury. If you're lucky, perhaps a thin linen undertunic, but even that is a rarity for the common inmate. If you're not, well, you're going commando under layers of scratchy, sweaty, unwashed wool, all lovingly stitched together by someone who probably had no idea what a seam was supposed to look like or simply didn't care about precision or comfort. The stitching is crude, often uneven, and the fabric is stiff with accumulated dirt, body oils, and the occasional dried bodily fluid. The wool itself is often low quality, coarse, and irritating to the skin, causing constant chafing and discomfort. There's also no washing machine, no fragrant soap, and absolutely no dry cleaner in sight. So your clothes are perpetually stained, stiff with dried sweat and grime, and scented like a compost pile that's been left to marinate in a pigsty for a decade. The smell is not just on your clothes. It permeates your skin, your hair, becoming a part of you.
Even if you wanted to wash them, it's not easy. You'd have to beg for permission, then haul water from a communal pump or well, heat it over a meager fire, if allowed and if fuel is available, scrub your tunic on a rough board with harsh lye soap or ashes, and then try to hang it in the sun, which in Victorian England is out approximately 3 days a year, or at least not consistently enough to dry clothes thoroughly. The process is exhausting, time-consuming, and the results are rarely satisfactory. The clothes remain damp, heavy, and perpetually itchy, a constant source of irritation. And don't even get me started on shoes. If you own any, they're ill-fitting, made of untreated, stiff leather, barely stitched together, and offer as much arch support as a banana peel. They're designed for basic protection against the elements and the rough ground, not comfort or style. Many inmates, especially the children, just go barefoot through the perpetually muddy, dung-strewn yards, through Victorian landmines, aka sharp rocks, broken glass, animal waste, and disease puddles. All this means one thing: your skin hates you. You itch constantly, a maddening, persistent torment that never truly subsides. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs live rent-free on your body, a thriving ecosystem of microscopic tormentors that feast on your blood. Everyone has them: the young, the old, the sick, the relatively healthy. Nobles might have had them too, but in the workhouse, there's no escape, no treatment, no delousing powder. You'll be scratching your armpit with a wooden spoon while chatting with the local overseer, and no one will even bat an eye. It's simply a fact of life, a universal affliction. Your skin is raw from constant rubbing, your scalp a battlefield of bites and scabs. And if you develop a rash, well, too bad. There's no dermatologist, no hydrocortisone, no one to tell you it's probably scabies or eczema exacerbated by filth. You just keep on suffering, silently, as part of the collective misery. And if you're lucky enough not to get a secondary infection from all that scratching, great. That rash will simply accompany you for the next 6 months like an unwanted Victorian sidekick, a constant, irritating reminder of your plight. Now that you're dressed in misery and wrapped in discomfort, smelling faintly of desperation and grime, it's time to head outside and start working yourself to death.
Now that you're fully dressed in itches and damp wool, and the bell has clanged for the start of work, it's time to flash that morning smile. Except you don't. Because in the Victorian workhouse, smiling is a dangerous game. Not emotionally, but dentally. There's no toothbrush, no toothpaste, no mouthwash, no floss. The very concept of oral hygiene, as we understand it, the daily ritual of cleaning and caring for your teeth, is about as popular as bathing, which is to say, not very. It's simply not a priority when survival is the only goal, and knowledge of germ theory is rudimentary at best. Some people might occasionally chew on a twig or rinse their mouths with plain water or perhaps a diluted vinegar if they could get their hands on it, but for the most part, your teeth are on their own, left to the mercy of a diet of gruel and hard bread. And they're not doing well. By the time you hit your mid-20s, your smile looks like something pulled from a haunted crypt, a collection of brown, broken, and missing teeth. Cavities are rampant, black holes appearing in molars and incisors, often spreading to the roots. Gums are swollen, inflamed, bleeding with the slightest touch, a constant source of pain and infection. And those aren't just food stains on your teeth. That's decay, a visible testament to neglect, poor nutrition, and the constant assault of bacteria. You have more rot in your mouth than a workhouse root cellar, a living testament to the lack of care. Sugar, while not yet everywhere, is becoming more common among the rich, imported at great cost, mostly used in small cakes or to show off wealth. If you're a workhouse master or a member of the Board of Guardians, congratulations. You get to rot your teeth faster than the inmates, often suffering from agonizing toothaches due to your sweet indulgences. If you're an inmate,
You'll do it slowly over time, with fermented bread, gritty porridge, and years of hard chewing on tough, fibrous foods that wear down enamel. Toothaches? Get used to them. They're like Victorian weather. Always there in the background, a dull, throbbing companion, occasionally flaring into excruciating agony that makes it impossible to eat or sleep. The kind of pain that makes you consider praying for death. Drinking, if you could get alcohol to numb it, or in extreme cases, pulling the tooth out yourself with a pair of pliers or whatever crude tool you can find. And that's not a joke. That was often the actual treatment. Dentists, as a specialized profession with any real training, didn't really exist for the poor. Instead, you might find a barber surgeon. Yes, the same guy who cuts your hair is also pulling your molars out by candlelight with an iron hook and zero anesthesia, relying on brute force and speed. Infected tooth? Hope you like fevers. Because without antibiotics, a simple tooth infection can easily turn into sepsis, a systemic infection that could kill you. That's right. The same thing that sends us to a pharmacy today could be your funeral in the 1800s workhouse. And there's no relief on the social front. Kissing? Good luck. Halitosis, or bad breath, is everywhere, a pervasive cloud that accompanies every interaction. If you're single, you're not judged by your smile, you're judged by your ability to work, your health, your perceived utility to the workhouse, and your general lack of moral corruption. In short, your mouth is a battlefield, and it's losing the war, a constant source of pain and potential infection. Now that your teeth are throbbing and your breath could fell a small horse, let's head outside. Because your real job, the one that will break your back and your spirit, is just getting started.
Time to head to work. Except there's no office, no desk, no coffee break, and absolutely no chance of promotion. Your job, if you're like 90% of the workhouse population, is simple. Don't die while laboring for someone else's comfort, or more accurately, for the workhouse's meager profits and to justify your own existence within its walls. The Workhouse Act of 1834 was founded on the principle that life inside should be less eligible than life outside, meaning it should be so unpleasant that only the truly desperate would seek refuge there. And the work was central to this philosophy. You are an inmate. Congratulations. That means you work, not for wages, but for your keep. The gruel, the hard bed, the itchy clothes. You rise with the bell, often before dawn, and you stop only when the evening bell signals the end of another grueling day. Your tools are primitive, designed for maximum labor and minimal skill. Men might be breaking stones for road building, a back-breaking task that leaves hands raw, blistered, and bodies aching with every swing of the hammer. The dust from the stones fills your lungs, a slow poison. Or perhaps you're grinding corn by hand, a monotonous, repetitive task that wears down your muscles and your spirit. Another common task was picking oakum, separating strands of old rope into loose fibers, a tedious, finger-numbing job that yielded tiny returns for the workhouse but consumed vast amounts of inmate time. Women are typically in the laundry, scrubbing mountains of dirty linen in cold, often contaminated water, their hands raw and chapped from harsh lye soap. Or they might be sewing, mending clothes for the workhouse, a never-ending task under poor lighting. They also perform domestic duties within the workhouse, cleaning, cooking, the gruel, of course, and caring for the sick. Their labor is constant, unseen, and utterly essential for the institution's functioning. Children, poor souls, Start helping out around age 5, performing light tasks like picking oakum, sweeping floors, or assisting in the laundry. No school, no toys beyond a few carved sticks, just a tiny wooden rake or a small bundle of rope, and a dream of one day not dying of the flu or consumption. Their childhood is brief, quickly replaced by the responsibilities of adulthood, their small bodies quickly worn down by the toil. There's no weekend, there's no clocking out, there's only sunrise to sunset 6 days a week, often 7 during peak seasons or if the master deems it necessary. Sunday is technically off, but only for compulsory church attendance, not for rest or leisure. The work is brutal, designed to be monotonous, physically demanding, and utterly soul-crushing. No one cares if you're tired. No one's asking how your mental health is doing. There's no concept of sick days or workers' rights. If you can't work, you don't eat. And if you don't eat, well, the Workhouse has a solution for that. It's called being replaced by the next desperate soul waiting at the gates, eager for even this grim existence. So you grip your hammer or your oakum, ignore the blisters, the aching back, the creeping cough, and you keep going. Because in the Victorian Workhouse, your job isn't a career. It's a slow-motion endurance test, a daily struggle against starvation and oblivion.
Now that your back is on fire from laboring in the yards and your lungs ache from the dust, let's talk about the weather. Because in the Victorian Workhouse, temperature is less about seasons and more about ongoing, relentless punishment from the sky, amplified by the institution's deliberate neglect and lack of proper infrastructure. Let's start with winter. There's no insulation, no central heating, and certainly no weather stripping. Just thick stone walls that radiate cold, with gaps you could throw a small rat through, allowing drafts to whistle through the dormitories. Your windows, if they exist, are high and barred, letting in meager light and constant, chilling currents of air. The fire and the communal hearth, nice in theory, but you don't have enough coal or firewood to keep it going constantly, because fuel is expensive and strictly rationed by the Board of Guardians. You bundle up in your one damp, thin wool tunic, huddle near the dying embers, and still wake up with your nose frozen, your breath misting in the frigid air. Your feet are permanently cold, often damp from the pervasive moisture that seeps through the stone, and your fingers so stiff they feel like tiny Victorian popsicles, clumsy and painful. Frostbite isn't diagnosed, it's just called bad luck or weak constitution. And if you lose a toe, it's merely another indignity. The damp cold penetrates everything, leading to chronic coughs, rheumatism, and a pervasive sense of misery. Now fast forward to summer. Sounds better, right? Wrong. In summer, your unventilated dormitory turns into a clay oven, trapping the oppressive heat. The high barred windows offer no cross breeze, and absolutely no deodorant exists to combat the inevitable stench. You sweat through your layers, but you can't remove them, because showing too much skin is scandalous and also invites sunburn, insect bites, and the judgmental glares of the overseers. The flies are out in full force, attracted to your unwashed body and the lingering smell of last week's gruel that's still fermenting in the corner of the communal dining hall. Mosquitoes buzz by your ear while you sleep, assuming you can sleep through the sound of your neighbors coughing, crying, or simply moaning in their restless slumber, made worse by the heat. In the workyards, the sun bakes you. No sunblock, no wide-brim hat unless you've fashioned one out of straw, like a pathetic attempt at protection. And the worst part? You still have to work, harder than ever, under the relentless sun. Heat stroke is just called taking a bad turn, and if you collapse, you're simply replaced by the next available laborer. You're suffering unnoticed. So, you're either shivering in your own stale sweat, wondering if your toes will make it to spring, or you're sweating through your only pair of socks while your thighs chafe into oblivion. Your skin, a constant landscape of rashes and bites. And the one thing that never changes, no matter the season, your clothes still itch, your food is still terrible, and your next soul-crushing job is still waiting. Welcome to climate control, Victorian workhouse style. There is none. You are at the mercy of the elements, and the institution offers no respite, only further tests of your endurance.
Feeling thirsty? Need to freshen up? Want to splash a little water on your face to wake up from this damp fever dream of a life? Too bad. In the Victorian workhouse, water isn't your friend. It's often trying to murder you, quietly, insidiously, a silent killer lurking in every drop. Let's start with drinking. The communal pump in the yard looks fresh, bubbling and clear, like something out of a pastoral painting. But spoiler alert, it's not. Upstream, someone just dumped a chamber pot into the ground, or a dead animal is probably decomposing in a nearby ditch, its fluids seeping into the water table. The ground around the pump is often muddy and contaminated. Parasites, bacteria, and the entire microbial army of Victorian England await in every sip. That's why outside the workhouse, people drank weak beer or gin, because brewing or distilling boiled the water, making it safer. But here, there's no such luxury. You drink the water, knowing deep in your gut that it might be the very thing that brings on the next wave of dysentery or cholera, diseases that could sweep through the crowded wards like wildfire. No one's happy about it, but at least it won't kill you immediately, hopefully. What about bathing? Surely water was used for cleaning? In theory, yes. In practice, absolutely not. See, back then, many people, including some medical professionals, believed bathing actually opened your pores and let disease in. This miasma theory of disease, where bad air caused illness, was prevalent, and washing was seen as counterproductive. That's right. Washing yourself was considered medically risky. You were apparently cleaner if you never removed the protective layer of filth caked onto your skin, which was believed to act as a barrier against disease. Communal bathhouses did exist in some towns, but they quickly gained reputations as places for gossip, scandal, and sometimes full-on Victorian extracurriculars. So naturally, the moral guardians got involved and shut many down or heavily restricted access, believing they encouraged immorality. Even if you did want to bathe, it was a full production, a rare and arduous task that might be permitted only once a month, if at all. You'd need to fetch water from the communal pump, haul it to a designated washing area, often an unheated, drafty room, heat it over a meager fire, if permitted, fill a rough wooden tub that likely leaked, and then pray no one else in the house used it before you, or worse, after, contaminating the water. And rainwater, collected in open barrels in the yard, was often used for washing, but these barrels were breeding grounds for birds, insects, and moss, adding to the microbial soup. Sounds refreshing, doesn't it? So whether it's going in your mouth, on your body, or used for the meager crops in the workhouse garden, water in the Victorian-era workhouse is less of a life source and more of a gamble. One wrong gulp, one unhygienic wash, and you're spending your final days sweating in a straw bed, clutching your stomach, and contemplating all your life choices.
The constant threat of waterborne illness was a major factor in the high mortality rates within these institutions. Next time you sip tap water, clean and pure, raise a glass for our ancestors. They didn't have the luxury of hydration without hazard.
So you drank the water. Or maybe you didn't. Maybe you just stubbed your toe on a rock shaped like disappointment during stone breaking, and now it's festering. Either way, you're sick. You need help. You need a doctor. Too bad you live in a Victorian workhouse where medicine is really just polite torture with a side of moral judgment, often administered by an overworked, underpaid, and frequently indifferent workhouse surgeon whose primary goal was often to save money, not lives. Let's start with the diagnosis. Everything wrong with you, whether it's a persistent cough, a spreading rash, a broken bone, or the creeping fever that signals consumption, tuberculosis, is often attributed to your own moral failings, your idleness, or simply the will of God. The old theories of humors might still linger in some minds, but now they're mixed with a burgeoning yet still primitive understanding of disease. Got a fever? Too much bad air, miasma, or perhaps you haven't been sufficiently grateful for your gruel and your shelter. The answer? Often purgatives, harsh laxatives designed to cleanse the system, inducing violent vomiting and diarrhea, further dehydrating and weakening you. Or perhaps a blister plaster to draw out the illness from your skin, a painful and ineffective remedy. And yes, the workhouse surgeon, often overwhelmed by the sheer number of sick inmates and limited resources, might prescribe these with little true understanding of your specific ailment, relying on rote methods. Now, if you break a bone or get a nasty wound from work, you're in real trouble. There's no anesthesia, unless you count passing out from sheer agony or a swig of cheap brandy, if you're very lucky. Surgery, if performed, is done with knives that haven't been properly sterilized, heated over an open flame, not for germ killing, they don't understand germs, but because they just look scarier that way. Antibiotics? Centuries away. Germ theory? Not widely accepted or understood in practice. They still think disease comes from bad air, miasma, or God being annoyed with your moral failings. Got a stomach ache? Must have been your sinful thoughts. Hope you like confessing while vomiting. The infirmary itself is often a crowded, unsanitary room, little better than the dormitories, a place where diseases easily spread from one patient to another. If your condition gets worse, you'll be treated with more harsh remedies, perhaps some opium to dull the pain, if you're lucky enough to get it and it's not too expensive, a poultice of dubious herbs, or even some crushed beetles. A chaplain will be at your bedside, offering prayers and preparing you for the inevitable. At this point, they are preparing for the cure, known as death, and hoping you don't infect anyone else. The workhouse infirmary, far from being a place of healing, was often a death trap, a final stop on the road to the pauper's grave. And if by some miracle you recover, everyone just assumes God took pity on you, or perhaps your moral fortitude saw you through. The workhouse surgeon takes full credit, and you're sent back to the oakum shed, weakened but alive, for now. So yes, in the Victorian workhouse, medicine is less about healing and more about surviving the cure, or perhaps simply surviving the indifference and the lack of scientific understanding.
After enduring the cures and the constant pain, your stomach growls, a hollow protest against the meager sustenance offered. You might hope for nourishing, healing food, designed to aid recovery and provide strength. But in a Victorian workhouse, the diet is often as debilitating as the illness itself, a deliberate part of the less eligibility principle. Food is basic, bland, and often insufficient. It's designed for economy, not for recovery or even basic human dignity. Breakfast is typically gruel or thin porridge, served lukewarm and tasteless, a watery consistency that offers little satisfaction. Lunch might be a small portion of boiled meat, if you're lucky, and if it's not rancid or of the lowest quality, accompanied by boiled vegetables like turnips or potatoes, often overcooked to a mush and devoid of nutrients. Dinner is usually a repeat of breakfast, more gruel or thin broth, a monotonous cycle of deprivation. Fresh fruit and vegetables are rare, reserved for the most privileged, the master and his family, or critically ill patients, and even then, sparingly. Spices are non-existent, making every meal a test of endurance for your palate. The food is often prepared in large, unsanitary kitchens, increasing the risk of contamination and foodborne illness. For patients with digestive issues or those weakened by other ailments, the food can be particularly detrimental, exacerbating their conditions rather than aiding recovery. Malnutrition is a constant threat, weakening already fragile bodies and making them more susceptible to further illness and less able to fight off existing ones. The lack of variety and flavor makes eating a chore, not a comfort, and many patients, weakened by their ailments, struggle to consume even the small portions offered, leading to a vicious cycle of weakening. The constant hunger pangs are a pervasive torment, a dull ache that never truly goes away. You eat because you must, because survival, however bleak, is the only option. Every bite is a reminder of your diminished state, of the lack of care and understanding that permeates the institution. Your body, already fighting disease, is now also fighting hunger and the nutritional deficiencies of the hospital diet. The food is not a source of strength or pleasure, but merely a means to prolong your suffering, a daily testament to the Workhouse's philosophy of minimal provision.
It's evening now. You've worked, suffered, and barely digested your suspicious stew. You might think the day is winding down, but don't get too relaxed because God is watching. So is the Workhouse chaplain, and so is your neighbor, Agnes, who will absolutely rat you out if you miss the compulsory evening prayers. In the Victorian Workhouse, religion isn't just part of life, it is life, enforced with an iron fist. The church, or rather, the moralistic principles it represented, controlled your calendar, your meager education, your very existence. Think of it as your spiritual landlord, and you're always behind on rent, constantly owing penance. Every day is structured around prayer bells and compulsory services. The Workhouse bell rings, summoning you to morning prayers before work. Grace hinders, but because missing prayer is an act of defiance, a sin that could lead to punishment, both earthly, reduced rations, solitary confinement, and divine, eternal damnation. Forget to bow your head during the Lord's Prayer? Sin. Grumble during the sermon, even silently? Sin. Think about your life outside, your lost family, your past comforts, or any worldly pleasure? Double sin. And yes, hell is very real, vividly real. The chaplain, often a stern and unyielding figure, describes it in glorious, terrifying detail, painting vivid pictures of eternal torment, rivers of fire, lakes of boiling blood, demons with pitchforks, and eternal wailing. If the Workhouse doesn't scare you enough, eternal damnation definitely will, a powerful tool of control. You can't read the Bible yourself because most inmates are illiterate, and even if you could, the Workhouse might not provide one. You rely entirely on the chaplain to interpret everything for you, his word becoming law. That means if he says your continued poverty is because you didn't pray hard enough, or because of your inherent moral failings, your idleness, or your past sins, well, time to kneel harder and repent more fervently. Tithes,
though not explicitly collected in money, are extracted in labor and absolute obedience. Your very existence is a form of spiritual payment. Holidays? They're holy days, strictly observed, with extra services and perhaps a slightly better meal, a rare treat. But they're not for fun or celebration. They're to attend Mass, fasting, confessing sins, and reminding yourself that joy is a dangerous indulgence, a distraction from the path of repentance and hard work. Questioning the workhouse's interpretation of Scripture or its rules is dangerous. Inmates who rebelled or showed signs of moral corruption were punished severely, often put in solitary confinement or on reduced rations, their spirits broken. So you go through the motions, you chant, you bow, you pray that your soul, after enduring this dirt-covered, miserable life, might finally land in paradise, assuming the chaplain likes you and deems you worthy. Because in the Victorian workhouse, God may be merciful, but the institution and its representatives, not so much. They wielded religion as a tool of social control, ensuring compliance through fear and moral condemnation.
If you thought being a Victorian workhouse inmate was rough, try doing it as a woman. All the filth, famine, and fear, plus the added burdens of constant childbirth, enforced subservience, and social invisibility. In the Victorian workhouse, being a woman is like being on hard mode with no health potions and no restart button, and the game is rigged against you from the start. From birth, a girl's life path, if she ended up in the workhouse, was pretty much locked in. Marry young, if you could find a suitable, equally desperate partner within or outside the workhouse, often with the master's approval. Bear children, serve your husband, if you had one, and ultimately die tired. Education? Not likely. Beyond rudimentary reading of scripture or basic domestic skills like sewing, scrubbing, and cooking. Your intellectual development stopped around the time you learned how to scrub floors and pick oakum, your potential stifled. Marriage, if it happened early. It wasn't weird to be betrothed at 16 and pregnant by 18. It wasn't about love or personal choice. It was about survival, about forming a unit that might just barely scrape by, or at least share the misery of existence. Your opinion? Not required. Once married, you were basically your husband's property, and in the workhouse, you were both property of the system. Your job was to produce more inmates, feed everyone with your meager rations, keep your tiny allocated space clean, and most importantly, not complain, because complaining might get you branded insubordinate, or worse, immoral, leading to severe punishment. Childbirth in the workhouse was a death lottery, a terrifying ordeal. There was no prenatal care, no sterile tools, no anesthesia beyond perhaps a swig of cheap gin if you were lucky. Midwives, often other inmates, or poorly trained staff did their best, but even minor complications could mean agonizing death for the mother, the child, or both. The unsanitary conditions of the infirmary, if one existed, only increased the risk of puerperal fever and other infections. Some women survived 10 pregnancies, their bodies ravaged by repeated births. Many didn't survive 2. But don't worry, once the baby was out, your work increased exponentially. Now you had a screaming infant in a lice-ridden, drafty dormitory, and you were expected to nurse, cook, if you were assigned to the kitchen, clean, and still perform your daily quota of oakum picking or laundry. You didn't get a break. You were the break for everyone else, your labor taken for granted. If you were unmarried and pregnant, you were often treated with extreme harshness, seen as morally corrupt,
a fallen woman, and your child was often taken from you and sent to the children's ward, or even apprenticed out, a brutal severing of the maternal bond. If you were widowed, you were vulnerable, often forced into the workhouse with no other means of support, at the mercy of the system. If you were outspoken, you were dangerous, quickly silenced, your voice deemed disruptive. Women who didn't conform to societal norms or workhouse rules were often accused of insubordination, especially if they had a strong personality, a defiant spirit, or just looked at an overseer the wrong way on a rainy Tuesday. Even in the workhouse church, your role was limited, your spiritual worth often ranked below men. In short, if you're a woman in the Victorian workhouse, you're expected to endure, obey, reproduce, and suffer in silence, ideally while maintaining a facade of gratefulness and piety, because even in a time of universal suffering, women were somehow expected to suffer gracefully, their burdens often heavier, their voices unheard.
So far, you've battled filth, starvation, social injustice, and possibly a rat. But just when you think your day can't get any worse, here comes violence. Loud, bloody, and often completely acceptable by workhouse standards, or at least ignored by those in power. It was an ever-present threat. Let's be clear, the Victorian workhouse was not a peaceful place. The idea of law and order mostly meant hoping the workhouse master wasn't in a bad mood or that the stronger inmates didn't target you. Violence was everywhere, in the dormitories, in the work yards, in the communal dining hall, and sometimes even in line for your meager rations. It wasn't just physical, it was institutional, psychological, and emotional. Crime, usually petty theft of food or small comforts, was common, born out of desperation. Punishment was brutal, and justice was more performance art than protection, designed to deter rather than rehabilitate. Steal a piece of bread? You could be put on bread and water for days, locked in a solitary cell, or even flogged, a public and humiliating spectacle. Accused of insubordination, of speaking out, or simply not working fast enough? You might be locked in a solitary cell, cold and dark for days on end, deprived of food and human contact. Gossip too much or complain too loudly? You might face public humiliation, perhaps forced to wear a sign proclaiming your offense. There was no trial by ordeal in the medieval sense, but the arbitrary nature of the master's justice felt just as cruel, with no right to appeal or fair hearing. Domestic violence, if you could call it that within the workhouse walls, was completely normal. Overseers were allowed, even expected, to discipline inmates, often with physical force, including canes or straps, for any perceived infraction. Street fights, or rather yard fights, were commonplace among inmates, driven by desperation, hunger, or sheer frustration, erupting over the smallest perceived slight or resource. You could be beaten just for looking the wrong way at another inmate's portion of gruel, or for not working fast enough, or simply because an overseer was having a bad day. And while large-scale wars weren't fought within the workhouse, the constant simmering tension, the struggle for survival, and the rigid hierarchy made every interaction a potential conflict, a test of dominance. Violence wasn't a breakdown of society in the workhouse. It was an inherent part of its structure, a tool of control and a reflection of the brutal social attitudes towards the poor. Everyone lived with the constant knowledge that life was fragile, justice was arbitrary, and your overseer or even your neighbor might inflict pain over the slightest infraction. There was no escape, no recourse, no one to protect you. So walk carefully, keep your eyes down, and never trust anyone with a position of power, for their authority was absolute and often cruelly exercised.
Amidst the grim realities of the workhouse, perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect was the fate of the children.
These were not just miniature adults. They were innocent souls, stripped of their childhood, condemned to a life of labor and despair from their earliest years, their potential extinguished before it could ever truly ignite. Children entered the workhouse for a myriad of reasons. Orphaned by disease or accident, abandoned by desperate parents unable to feed them, or simply brought in with their destitute parents, swept up by the tide of poverty. Once inside, they were immediately separated from their families, often by gender and age, a brutal severing of familial bonds. The family unit was seen as a potential source of moral corruption or resistance to the workhouse rules, so segregation was strictly enforced. A mother might rarely see her own child, perhaps only for a brief, supervised visit, a crushing emotional burden that left both parent and child longing for connection. Education, if it existed, was rudimentary at best. They might be taught basic literacy and arithmetic, often from the Bible or moralistic tracts, but the primary focus was on industrial training, preparing them for a life of manual labor, ensuring they would not become a burden on society. Boys would learn trades like shoemaking, tailoring, carpentry, or stone breaking, often in poorly equipped, unsanitary workshops. Girls were trained in domestic service, laundry work, needlework, or picking oakum. These skills were often basic, designed to make them useful servants or factory workers, not to offer them a path to true upward mobility or a better life. Playtime was virtually non-existent. Their days were filled with monotonous, repetitive tasks, picking oakum until their fingers bled, sweeping floors, cleaning, or assisting in the laundry. They were expected to work long hours, just like the adults, their small bodies quickly worn down by the toil, their bones aching, their spirits dulled. Malnutrition was rampant, stunting their growth and making them highly susceptible to disease. The workhouse infirmaries were often filled with sick children, succumbing to measles, scarlet fever, diphtheria, consumption, tuberculosis, or simple fevers that, without proper care, quickly turned fatal. Discipline was harsh, often physical. Children were punished for insubordination, laziness, or even simply for crying or showing emotion. The silent system, where inmates were forbidden to speak to one another, was sometimes enforced even among children, further isolating them and crushing their spirits, forcing them into a world of quiet despair. They grew up in an environment devoid of affection, warmth, or genuine care, learning only obedience, resignation, and the grim lessons of survival. Many children were apprenticed out from the workhouse at a young age, often as young as 7 or 8, to factories, mines, or as domestic servants. While this offered an escape from the workhouse walls, it often meant a transfer to another form of exploitation, working long hours for meager pay, far from any protective family, often enduring harsh conditions and abuse. For these children, the workhouse was not a temporary refuge, but a grim conveyor belt to a life of perpetual labor, their innocence lost before it ever had the chance to blossom, their laughter rare, their dreams often extinguished before they could even form, replaced by the stark reality of their existence.
At this point, you've made it through the lice, the constant hunger, the laundryless misery, and the looming threat of arbitrary punishment. You've witnessed the suffering of adults and children alike. But now comes the final chapter of most workhouse lives, an early, and unglamorous death, often unmourned and quickly forgotten. If you're alive and still breathing past the age of 40 in the workhouse, you're practically a celebrity, a statistical anomaly. You might even be referred to as the Old One, which is less of a nickname and more of a quiet acknowledgement of your improbable longevity in such a brutal environment. Let's break it down. The average life expectancy within the workhouse hovered around 30 to 40 years, but that number is dragged down heavily by infant and child mortality. Nearly half of all children born in or admitted to workhouses died before reaching age 5. Disease, malnutrition, or one bad winter was all it took. There were no vaccines, no antibiotics, no hope beyond the most basic, often ineffective remedies. If you survived childhood, you entered adulthood already exhausted, your body worn down by deprivation and labor. Work began as soon as you could walk upright, and by 25, your joints creaked like an old door, your back ached, and your body was already showing signs of premature aging. You might be missing several teeth from decay, a finger from a work accident, and most of your original optimism had long since faded, replaced by a grim resignation. Women faced a particularly deadly gauntlet: childbirth. It was one of the leading causes of death for workhouse women, a terrifying ordeal, often conducted in unsanitary conditions with minimal assistance. No pain relief, no sterile medical intervention beyond what a poorly trained midwife could offer. Just prayer, perhaps some hot water, and another inmate holding your hand while you bled out on a straw-stuffed cot in the infirmary. Some women, remarkably, survived 10 pregnancies, their bodies utterly ravaged. Many didn't survive 2, succumbing to puerperal fever or complications. For men, the dangers were different, but equally relentless. Work accidents, such as crushing injuries from stone breaking or falls, were common. Infections from minor wounds, which would be easily treated today, often turned fatal without antibiotics. A neighbor's drunken rage could lead to a fatal brawl, and simply the pervasive consumption, tuberculosis, that swept through the crowded, unventilated dormitories claimed countless lives, its victims slowly wasting away. Even walking to the market, if you were allowed outside, could be risky if you crossed paths with a bored ruffian or an angry official. Death could also come quietly from diseases like cholera or typhus, which turned workhouses into charnel houses overnight, whole wards decimated in days, or from famine, which, though less common in the workhouse itself due to guaranteed, though meager, rations, could last entire seasons outside, thinning out entire villages and driving more desperate souls to the workhouse gates, only to meet a similar fate inside. Or from bad luck, like eating spoiled gruel and spending your final hours hallucinating and screaming at the walls, your mind succumbing before your body. And funerals, you were lucky if you got one that involved more than a cursory burial. Bodies were often buried quickly, in shallow, unmarked graves in the workhouse cemetery to avoid disease and save costs. There was no embalming, no polished coffins, no grieving family, just a rough shroud, a few murmured prayers by the chaplain, and a shallow mound of earth if there was enough space left. Your existence, your suffering, your death, all were just statistics in the grim ledger of the workhouse, quickly forgotten as the next destitute soul took your place. So yes, in the Victorian workhouse, life was brutal, short, and constantly under siege by death in all its casual, unglamorous forms. You didn't retire, you just stopped showing up. And speaking of exits, let's move on to your final chapter. The workhouse dream dies.
So, how's your day been? You've woken up in filth, relieved yourself into a communal pit, eaten tasteless gruel, brushed your teeth with wishful thinking, nearly passed out from hunger, worked until your spine cried for mercy, scratched your way through itchy wool, prayed to not get cholera, and barely dodged a beating for looking the wrong way at an overseer. You've seen children lose their innocence to endless toil, and witnessed the unceremonious deaths of your fellow inmates. Welcome to a single brutal day in a Victorian workhouse. Still dreaming of the compassionate care of yesteryear? Of a simpler, more moral time? Think again. That romanticized version of Victorian medical progress, the grand buildings, the dedicated doctors, the benevolent charity, it's a myth, polished by nostalgic accounts and sanitized medical histories. In truth, the Victorian workhouse was often a terrifying place, a last resort for the desperate, a place where the poor went to die, stripped of their dignity and humanity. Hierarchy was everything. If you were poor, your care was minimal, your comfort non-existent, your voice unheard. If you were wealthy, you might afford a private room and slightly better attention in a proper hospital. But even then, you were still at the mercy of a rudimentary medical understanding. The simpler times weren't simple, they were relentless. Everything took longer, everything hurt more. Everything from a simple cut to a complex surgery, from childbirth to chewing your daily bread, came with life-threatening consequences. Healing was a gamble, not a guarantee. Life was survival, not leisure. And if you did find a quiet moment to think, to dream, to imagine something better, there wasn't much you could do with it. No upward mobility, no truly effective medicine, no internet to Google, "What's this weird rash?" You lived, suffered, and often died within the confines of those disease-ridden walls, or a 10-mile radius of where you were born, rarely venturing further than the next town. But here's the wildest part. Through all of this, people still sought help. They still clung to the hope of recovery, endured unimaginable pain, and found moments of fleeting connection with fellow sufferers, a shared glance, a whispered word of comfort. Not because life was easy, but because humans are stubborn like that. Even in the darkest chapters, they made space for light, a flicker of resilience against the overwhelming darkness. So tonight, when you slip into your clean bed with indoor plumbing, antibiotics, and central heating, maybe say a quiet thank you to the modern world. You wouldn't have lasted a day